Hello, my name is Holly Purchase and I'll be your webinar host today. We're expecting the presentation to last for about 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. Please note that we'll be muting the telephone line during the webinar, except for the speakers. So if you have any questions, please submit them using the question tools on screen. We'll be collating all the questions at the end and we'll look to answer as many as possible. We'll also be providing a written response to delegates of all the questions received during the webinar. Following the presentation, we'll post a copy of the recording from the session onto the PRISYM ID website, and we'll notify all registered attendees when it's available. In today's webinar, we'll discuss gaining an understanding of global clinical trials labelling in practical terms, understanding how labelling systems can remove the perceived complexities of local language labelling, realising how to manage source data for labels, booklets and IFUs, and learning how to customise labels for country-specific requirements. There will then be the Q&A. Today we have two specialist speakers, Vince Postel and Warren Ward-Stacey from PRISYM ID. Vince has been tasked with building strategic relationships with key partners to increase market share in a variety of sectors, including clinical trials, by building compelling joint value propositions with our software. He has over 25 years' experience within the auto ID market, delivering in both commercial and product development roles. Before joining in 2004, Vince worked for a number of auto ID companies and was responsible for product management and the subsequent sales of defence electronics, environmental monitoring equipment, and specialist printing software and interfacing technology. Warren has a comprehensive knowledge of the auto ID industry, with particular emphasis on global label management systems. He joined in 2002 and is passionate in his desire to deliver market-leading solutions which satisfy the needs of our customers worldwide. He has a detailed knowledge of the labelling management requirements of our clients within FDA-regulated environments. Without further ado, let me pass you over to Vince.
Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar today. Global clinical trials labelling is a complex subject and clearly an integral part of clinical trials supplies management. The landscape is varied in terms of the systems and processes employed in designing, populating and printing of labels. And with labels we'll also consider booklets and IFUs. Also, there are a number of stakeholders and a few main organisations using a range of solutions and standard operating procedures to produce clinical supplies. There are generally three main parties involved in clinical trials labelling, and these include the pharmaceutical R&D, the discovery companies themselves, clinical supplies organisations, and booklet label printing companies. The discovery companies that wish to trial the drugs adopt a range of approaches to the packaging and labelling of supplies, ranging from in-house management of the whole process to an outsourced model where clinical supplies companies take on a complete job, to an approach where only part of the task is subcontracted. Also, as we will see later, production of booklets is a very specialist area, so there are companies that focus solely on the aspects of booklet production, overprinting and labelling. These various groups of companies, with their own unique set of skills and objectives, need to work very closely together and share the information, designs and data to provide a sound and secure process for the creation of the required labels and booklets. As mentioned, there are many systems, specific applications and operating procedures throughout the supply chain, making the generation, management and transfer of data a challenge. In some specific areas, the industry would benefit from a more standardised and cohesive approach, using aligned systems with a common approach to certain processes. The premise being to reduce the number of duplicate checks and balances that need to take place. And this would obviously need to be a robust and highly secure solution. Clearly, there are a number of stakeholders throughout the actual process, including those responsible for the regulatory submissions, designing the protocols and the various approvals that take place through the complete life cycle, typically involving qualified persons and regulatory affairs and other specialists. However, for the review of global clinical trials labelling, we are going to concentrate on the actual management of information, data and asset designs. I'd like to start by defining the basic assets, the label, booklet and the information for use, known as an IFU. It might seem very basic, but the creation of these various assets is subtly different Whereas labels can be printed on demand or truly just in time, as can IFUs, the booklet is a little more complicated, to say the least. So what do we mean by a label, booklet and IFU in terms of what they are, the technology used and the design principles? Each must be handled in a different way due to their different complexities. The term single panel label seems to describe this well. It's a single panel, adhesive back paper or synthetic label. Interestingly, it's not simply single language labels that are printed on single panel labels. There's enough room on the label, a few languages can be printed. Alternatively, countries where the same language is spoken but only certain information changes, such as the sponsor, can also benefit from the single panel label approach. A single panel label is usually printed on a thermal transfer printer such as a Zebra, SATA or Intermec, where labels are on rolls and printed either on demand or in a batch process mode. There is technology available to inspect labels when printed on demand or offline following batch printing processes, which we will look at briefly towards the end of this session. It's worth mentioning that desktop laser printing can be used, where sheets of paper rather than rolls are used, but this tends to be more of a batch process due to the number of labels per page being printed. Single-panelled labels are the approach to printing in a non-demand basis, with possibilities to join up all systems to provide a highly efficient just-in-time approach. Just-in-time printing is a massive subject and one that we should consider in its own right. A format is a particular design of label that when combined with data can be printed. When designing a label, there are specific elements that need to be addressed, including Unicode text with sophisticated copy fit and formatting functionality, images, product images and logos, line art and barcodes, plus new developments in 2D codes and RFID. Booklets are multi-page and complex, and there's a lead time in their production, requiring an inventory to support the trial. A booklet is generally made up of a back page that carries the glue for adhering to the surface, a front cover that is often overprinted with patient-specific and product data at time of dispatch pack, a spine that is sometimes the area where the overprinting is placed, and an index to identify the country-specific pages, usually the first page in the book, and the country-specific pages. Booklets are an interesting subject in that highly specialist printing and production technology is required to produce them. This dictates that their production is almost exclusively outsourced to specialist booklet manufacturers. Consideration must be given to how a booklet is designed and what the actual output from the system or process is that will be supplied to the manufacturing company. Therefore, the systems deployed for designing booklets should consider the output of the actual booklet layout and information for the third party to use, rather than how to drive a particular printing press or digital printing technology that would require considerable capital expenditure. An approach is to provide the output in either a single or a multi-page PDF format. An area that brings together both booklets and in effect label printing is what is termed overprinting. The type of technology of choice used to overprint booklets tends to be dictated by the size or the thickness of the booklet in terms of number of pages. For small booklets, thermal transfer printers can be used, and for large booklets, the technology employed tends to be inkjet. As well as capabilities for design mentioned as part of the label design earlier, text and barcodes, etc., a booklet is multi-page, and the country-specific regulations mean not all pages are the same in terms of the format. An instruction for use is the instruction leaflet within a container that provides instructions to the patient. IFU leaflets are not used much in clinical trials due to the use of booklets, but I think it's worthy of inclusion as laser printed documentation that can be printed on demand or just in time can be very useful. The fact that IFUs can include variable data is a capability that should not be overlooked, and with the use of readily available and affordable technology, IFUs can be easily printed in-house if required. There are a number of different elements that need to be considered when designing a label, whether it's for a single panel label, booklet or IFU. These include text, phrases, variables, barcodes and graphics. Some of the regulatory requirements that need to be printed on labels include name of sponsor, clinical research organisation or investigator, trial reference code to allow identification of the trial, trial subject identification number, treatment number, for clinical trial use only or similar type wording, and quantity of dosage, etc. There are many more. Generally, the industry requires text formatting using Windows fonts for the need to be able to resize individual blocks or individual characters. Using bold, italic, underlining and Unicode must be supported. A number of languages may be needed per label. This is dependent on whether the data can fit on a single panel as to whether labels are produced rather than booklets. The ability to toggle from any foreign language to English is a common requirement so that English equivalent can be viewed. Variables on a format allow values to be added to a label when it is designed and then added to the label at the time of print. In essence, a value may or may not be known when the format has been designed. Instead, it can be decided when the label is physically printed. For example, if the date of the label is printed is included on the label, this cannot be set until the label is actually printed, and so would be represented by a variable. All linear and 2D barcodes must be available as part of the design tool. 2D symbologies will become more commonly used as e-labeling increases. In the same way that phrases are approved, icons, logos and pictures need to have an approval process before being added to a label, and this will be seen later in the presentation. So what are the challenges facing those responsible for clinical supplies labelling? Let's drill down a bit into the problems. Trials are run in many countries, so there is obviously a need for translated instructions, but within a particular language spoken in different countries, there can be small differences that need to be catered for at a very local level. At the time of print, data can come from a range of systems: trial data, randomization data and production data. This requires sound management and control to bring version-controlled information from all systems together to print at the point of dispatch. If we consider a single country where a trial will be run, this is also country-specific requirement issues, which means that design of labels is different dependent upon the destination country. This can be relatively straightforward to address for single-panelled labels and on-demand printing approach, but more of a challenge for booklet designs when large amounts of information need to be managed, plus multiple page formats. In essence, once a stock of booklets has been printed, there is little chance to make changes to the booklet itself. Here are a few of the challenges facing those involved in clinical trials label printing. With regards to language problems, there's a need to know early in which countries the trial will be run, especially for booklets. All phrases need to be approved and ready in good time. Phrases need to be translated quickly and efficiently using in-house resource or third parties. Plurals need to be managed with confidence. It is needed to know whether the text will fit on an area when printed in a different language, and local languages differences need to be handled, same language with small differences. Data problems may include data that needs to be brought into one place to be managed. The same data needs to be used to populate all assets labelled booklets and IFUs. Data needs to be maintained and managed independent of the asset design, and some data may need to be brought in from external suppliers. All data and the right version of data need to be available at the time of print. Design problems can include the need to know early how the drug will be packaged, and understanding of the country-specific requirements. Will the label be produced in-house or outsourced? Which label material will be used, stock labels or custom design consumables? Will there be enough room on the label for all the information? Ideally, all systems used in the process will be joined up. Re-entry of data or cut and paste is not desirable. And finally, how will the drug be packaged? Systems and processes need to be flexible to be able to use an array of label types and sizes, standard booklet designs or more complex custom booklet designs. Basically, the more automated and robust the system, the better, and if run efficiently, can provide a company with competitive advantage. Before we launch into considering in more detail the local language, country-specific requirements and data management, it is well worth considering a simple process map. Here's a high-level process map illustrating the areas of data creation and management, plus design of booklets and labels. There are a number of fundamental capabilities which should be regarded as the building blocks for an approach and/or solution for efficient clinical trials label printing. If these building blocks are not in place, the stack of cards will be fragile, to say the least. Therefore, it is vital that they are in place to provide a robust, validated approach. We will consider this later in more detail, but initially I would like to consider the common elements that need to be in place for every part of this process and the way in which we should approach the task. As was seen from the previous slide, the clinical trial supplies process requires the design of labels, booklets and IFUs be populated by information and data from a range of data repositories or systems, including trial data and production data. There are a number of base capabilities that are common throughout any fully compliant system that meets current good manufacturing processes, and clearly one that meets country-specific requirements such as the FDA's 21 CFR Part 11 in the US. It makes sense to consider these elements briefly and to understand in principle what they offer, as disparate systems that use different approaches will not only cause complications but can increase the operational overhead and risk. In essence, the processes need to be proven, reliable and robust, and if the pieces of technology that provide this functionality are able to be reused and are common throughout the system, the user's experience will be enhanced by a standard approach throughout all the processes that take place in the field of data and language management, plus label and booklet design. I believe a robust system with a solid foundation will have the common and reusable approach for security, version and revision control, searching, plus audit and reporting. When we consider some of the diverse users required, access to a system including multiple departments, regulatory specialists, label designers and third-party organisations, it's clear that all parties need access to the system and must be able to do so unhindered and in a controlled and well-managed way. The level of security, flexibility and ease of administration to such a capability is fundamental. Specific tasks must be controlled by user permissions. In essence, if a user does not have the rights to undertake a certain function, they will be restricted from using that function. You see the granular approach to user permissions for setting up Label Designer, which in this case is including the creating a change request, can create an image and create a label format. If we consider third-party access to a system, the solution will need to provide a range of user rights to be able to record and report all actions. For instance, when we look at language management and translations later, there may be a need for us to set up a third-party access for an external translator to be able to submit translations. The illustration provided is an external translator with permissions to read and edit translations. A highly secure audit trail is required to be maintained, as would be expected from a solution meeting the requirements of the FDA 21 CFR Part 11. All stakeholders will want a common approach to secure a historic transaction log, maintaining the complete history of all actions, recording the format design, source phrases, trial phrases and all variable data, and actions logged against user, workstations, date and time. There are two main elements to reporting. Reporting of the audit log, as detailed above, in essence what has been done by time, period, transaction type, the user and machine and data, and access to and reporting on the data held within the system, i.e. production data, translation and trial information. Finally, version and revision control should be common throughout the system. The process will need to follow something like the three-stage approvals process shown in the next slide. This common approach can and should be used wherever possible to provide a standard reusable approach. Assets that need to be version controlled will include dictionaries and phrases, template designs with country-specific content and data. The approach to approvals is important, as it can be based on either single item approval or job-based approvals, but the principles are the same. The approvals of assets can and should be an automated process where assets are routed to specialists for approval or rejection. The standard approach to automated, rules-based routing of assets is fundamental to a rounded solution. In addition, the ability to add additional supporting information such as documents and the ability to provide approval and rejection comments during the process can be very useful. In more advanced systems, we've started to see proactive managed approvals, emails being sent to required approvers, and more sophisticated management of rejected approvals, plus advanced rules that can be configured and enforced that include group approvals or must be approved by type rules. We will now show the three-stage approval process, design, pending and approved. In summary, a solution and process is required that manages users throughout every step of data creation, design management and printing, with the underlying system based on GAMP5 model to gain GMP compliance. And in terms of technology, a web-based solution makes sense. The solution should use a standard approval and version control process throughout, maintaining separate versions of each asset with an approved management system that allows the users to highlight and comment on any areas of correction that are relevant to the asset being reviewed. The process used must provide a coherent identification approach to maintain the integrity of each version of each asset and incorporate collaborative approvals management. an approvals management system that allows multiple items to be grouped together into logical containers, and when multiple items are grouped into a single review process, the system should allow users to make decisions on individual items without having to compromise the decision on the entire job. To control clinical trials labelling on global scale, a number of key functions need to be managed. In this section we are going to look at the perceived complexities of local language labelling, managing source data for labels, booklets and IFUs, customizing labels for country-specific requirements. Local language labelling is concerned with how to manage phrases in different languages and to drill down to a highly local language level to ensure the instructions and information provided is understood precisely. For example, in South America, several versions of Spanish may be required. The need for a local person to understand these subtleties is important, and the use of technology to assist in this process is essential, yet difficult to achieve. We need truth, accuracy and reliability at all times. The complexities of local language labelling can include management and control independent of language. A dictionary concept can help. Translation of individual phrases, bulk translation import, very specific local language differences, country-specific requirements, trial-specific language management or centralized language management plus mandatory phrases, use of internal translation people and or third-party translation companies, secure access to the system by all stakeholders, management of plurals in the most efficient and robust way possible, printing labels on demand, multiple page booklets and the associated lead times. The approach to local language labelling across clinical supplies industry varies from centrally administered phrase libraries that cover many languages and are common to all the trials that are labelled, through to organisations that prefer to administer a set of phrases specific to each trial and limited to only the languages required. Regardless of the differences in the approach to the management of phrases and local language labelling, there are a number of key aspects that need to be addressed. The key objective is to ensure that the phrases used on a particular piece of design work are correct and remain correct through the complete trial. Once the phrases have been created and approved, it is required that the content can be used across a variety of final patient-facing artwork, labels, booklets and IFUs. Also, language experts must be able to manage efficiently all the phrases in their language and must be able to monitor the impact of any changes proposed or implemented to the phrase library. Therefore, approved phrases and sets of phrases need to be managed outside of a specific trial and held independent of the trial. One of the goals of the phrase library is to allow native speakers to contribute. This is where the access to the system is managed by rigorous security features and user rights. A contributor may have the right to view and review only and not physically change anything. If you recall, the access rights for a translator was considered earlier in the review of the standard building blocks. Creating sets of phrases and group phrases is a logical approach, such as dosage phrases. Individual phrases need to be version controlled and managed, as do groups of phrases and mass import of phrase data. Also, the ability for the user to designate the source language that is used as the original basis for the translation must be accommodated. English as the source is most common, but if the source translation starts in French, it needs to be translated and managed from French to German or any other language. It is therefore useful to be able to import and export source phrases. The ability to be able to bulk import all phrases that have already been translated in a controlled and auditable manner is especially useful when a system or trial has been set up. If we look at import of phrases into a management tool, common import cases might include the phrase in the import file has no existing record. The phrase in the import file can map to an existing record that is able to be modified. The phrase in the import file can map to an existing record that is locked or not able to be modified. The handling of plural cases as a process requires specific consideration. Whilst in UK English there is a well understood convention of singular and plural, in other written languages, however, there are multiple different plurals that need to be managed for the same singular form. The Holy Grail is a controlled, audible but flexible approach to allow language data configuration to be structured and managed in a number of ways. A system that is flexible and configurable should provide the capabilities for centrally administered phrases, a set of phrases specific to a trial, limited only to languages required for a particular trial, and group phrases. The phrases that are common to all countries and trials, phrases that could be translated once and used many times by all companies in industry. it is worth considering a set or a pack of phrases that the industry could adopt. The same could be said for images, as there are some common type images, but these are not extensively used. The set of phrases shared by many is an interesting concept, an approach that has been adopted in other industries, such as the transportation of hazardous materials across Europe, commonly known as GHS standard, which is global harmonization. In this instance, the risk and safety phrases and pictograms are standard and common, and various companies maintain a commercial set of phrases that they sell, support and maintain. The dictionary concept is one that isolates a particular phrase from its translations. Using this approach, we can utilize the security, version control and audit trail, as detailed earlier, to control and manage dictionary itself. The concept of a version controlled dictionary is a robust approach and means that we can manage the dictionary totally independent of the translations. For instance, a dictionary may well be defined in English, but the translation of the dictionary in English means that a totally independent translation database will exist in all the required languages. In essence, we can have someone that manages the dictionary and different people or a person that would create the actual translations themselves. Another approach can be to organize a set of regulatory terms and then divide this into terms used on a specific trial. The same is true for packaging specific terms, and again divided and used on a specific trial. The terms and phrases to populate a label, design, booklet or IFU could be easily sourced from any of these repositories. In summary, I've tried to illustrate that although the management of language data can be complex, by using the right principles and approach for configuration, the task could be controlled and well managed by various stakeholders in different locations. Language information and its management should be totally integrated with an on-demand label printing approach. However, when we consider booklets, there's need for them to have been designed and printed early and in good time to be used within the actual trial. Therefore, in the case of booklets, when we consider the bringing together of information and data, the approach is overprinting an already printed booklet available from stock, and an area we considered in some detail earlier. When printing labels on demand, there's a need to bring all information and data together into one place, and this includes language-specific information, plus the trial data itself, randomization data, and production data. All this information needs to be brought together to populate all labels, formats, on demand at point of dispatch, and the same is true for booklet overprinting. There are, in essence, two main scenarios when considering the management of source data. Interestingly, the scenarios adopted is not so much to do with the data itself, but the way in which the data is to be handled because of the organisation that will undertake the actual printing and packaging. The two areas to consider are data management in-house by pharmaceutical companies, and the second one being clinical supplies organisations that undertake the printing for a range of clients. It's probably fair to say that because the pharmaceutical company owns the data, then the use of this data and integration into internal systems is much more straightforward, whereas a third-party clinical supplies company needs to accept data in various formats from its clients, and there is no single format or approach. Therefore, the solutions and processes they need to employ must be flexible and robust. The data that a clinical supplies organisation receives can be provided in various formats. This can include PDFs, CSV files, or a direct link to the customer's data. The clinical supplies companies need to ensure that the data received has not and cannot be changed. This means that the data needs to be locked and robust operating procedures in place, such that the data is placed in a secure location, locking the file and restricting access. However, solutions exist for clinical trials label data management that provide specific features for the generation and management of trial data. The systems securely and accurately manage clinical trials data for supplies and complete patient kit, patient packing labeling. There are a number of pieces of information that need to be managed, stored and easily updated. These include patient stratifications, multiple centre management, visit and treatment login management. In essence, applications need to be easily set up to allow all stratifications to be defined. Basically, if it needs to be printed on a label or part of a label run, for instance, print all labels for males over the age of 35, or viewed or reported upon, the system must have this information available in the data management process. In the case of the pharmaceutical companies, the data management issues are the same. However, there is much more opportunity for tight integration into existing and future systems, including inventory management systems, ERP, manufacturing execution and packaging systems. The screenshot illustrates the mapping of imported data to the destination fields in the in-house system. For instance, imported data, source field AT15 patient ID, is mapped to destination field patient ID, and so on. Once data is created within the system or imported, it can then be filtered to manage specific print runs. For instance, the illustration shows a print run for drug A, females visits 1 to 3 for Broad Street surgery, providing flexibility and control of the physical printing process. The generation of randomized data can either be an in-house generated exercise or one where the data is received externally for use in a particular trial. Typically, a large pharmaceutical company will generate their own randomization data and either use this themselves for printing of the labels or overprinting, or send it to the company they have outsourced the clinical trial supply job to. If, however, you are a clinical trial supply organisation, you may do jobs for a vast range of companies and some smaller companies that do not have their own randomization tools. In this instance, the clinical trials supply organisation will need to use solutions that manage the randomization as part of the trial. The creation of randomization data needs to follow the same process as all other parts of the trial in terms of approval and version control. Enterprise resource planning systems are required to conduct and manage the business processes, in essence to ensure product is available for dispatch at the right place and at the right time, and that the complete inventory and supply chain is automated and controlled. The clinical trials world is varied in its use of ERP, MRP, inventory management, packaging management and logistics systems because of the nature of the business. Consequently, there is need for best-of-breed point solutions for label printing and packaging to interface seamlessly to a range of systems. Whatever system has been adopted, there will be the need for global trials labelling to link to that data within the organisation. The type of data required from, say, an ERP system may include use-by date, batch codes and other manufacturing specific information. This product batch information needs to be accessed and recorded for traceability purposes, particularly in the case of pharmaceutical discovery companies, and there is a need for integration to various internal systems. And the way this is integrated can include database staging and production tables, APIs, commercial ones and custom, and file import. In summary, data for creation of labels and overprinting of booklets can come from a range of systems. It is a preferred process that the data be managed centrally for a particular trial, and there tends to be three main types of data: randomization data, trial data, production data from ERP systems. The creation and management of this data needs to be based on all the key principles as before, and the solution needs to be flexible in the import and export of data in readily available and readable formats. Generally, the purpose of regulatory labelling for clinical trials is to provide protection of the subjects, plus identification and traceability of the trial itself. We looked at some of the regulatory requirements that needed to be printed on labels earlier in the presentation, including name of sponsor, clinical research organisation or investigator, trial reference code to allow identification of the trial. But there are country-specific requirements for labelling, creating divergence from a specific standard across the industry, which increases the amount of work required in the implementation and support of a clearly defined and controlled process. We have considered the language issues, the local language requirements, and bringing together of all the information and data for an on-demand printing and overprinting process for booklets. Looking back to the early part of the review, we also considered the design elements that needed to be addressed in the design of labels booklets, which included text formatting for Windows fonts, resizing of individual blocks of text and individual characters, the use of bold, italics and underlining, and the need for Unicode support. Variables needing to be managed within the design to allow values to be added to the label when it is designed and for the data to be added to the label at the time of print. Linear and 2D barcode support must be available as part of the design toolset, plus RFID support. And in the same way that phrases are approved, icons, logos and pictures need to have an approval process before being added to a label. The design of labels and booklets involves a number of people, including the labelling team, clinical supplies, management and marketing. However, it's regulatory affairs that are responsible for the technical labelling of the product. These are the experts for the regulatory requirements as well as the interface of the contributing scientific experts. Therefore, the regulatory affairs specialist can coordinate the decision process and approvals for the labelling in clinical trials, ensuring close cross-functional communication of several departments where regulatory affairs is the interface to all stakeholders of the workflow. A solution that has a label design tool and booklet design tool is the first step, but the ability for regulatory affairs specialists to review and approve country-specific designs is very important, in exactly the same way as the language information can be viewed and approved locally by specialist language experts within a controlled, auditable process for managing the task. The screenshot illustrates an example of a label design linked directly to some source data, showing available trial and patient data in the bottom right-hand corner. This would need to be approved by various stakeholders in the process before it reached an approved status to be used in the trial. Here is an example of a booklet design using Microsoft Word integration tools to create and print multiple page booklets based on the same data sources as the label designs, including dictionary and translation data. The individual page designs will be different for each language based on the country's specific requirements. As before, this would need to be approved by the various stakeholders in the process before it reached an approval status. As detailed, there are country-specific regulatory requirements that need to be adhered to. The Regulatory Affairs Manager can have overall responsibility for the management of the approvals process, but a mechanism to advise, remind, or guide label and booklet content authors of the specific requirements that individual countries have in place for artwork design is very desirable. From the perspective of the specific phrases that must be used on labels for specific countries, this is a relatively straightforward problem to overcome, as this can be addressed through the template creation and approvals process. The more complex scenario is that of the conditional requirement. These requirements are of the type, this must be used, but also cover conditional situations where one asset is required based upon the presence or absence of another asset on the artwork. In exactly the same way as we have seen language specialists gain access to the system and having defined user rights, the same is true for the regulatory specialists for the individual regions and countries. In all parts of the process, we have seen the need for standard approach to certain process fundamentals in terms of security, version control and auditing. There are issues associated with local language labelling that can be overcome by using structured, auditable approach. Data comes from various sources requiring close integration with in-house systems or import of supplied data, and we have seen in the area of country-specific design the need for an approach, a mechanism to advise, remind or guide label content authors during design. Finally, the printing of labels and booklets requires that information and data from various systems be brought together into a central place at the point at which the supplies are labelled and dispatched. The more automated and robust the system, the better, and if run efficiently with the right number and level of checks and balances, can provide a company with a competitive advantage. The overall goal should be a complete end-to-end controlled and approvals-based process, from label and booklet design, data integration to print and final label inspection, eliminating any possible room for errors. I'm going to hand over to Warren Ward-Stacey now, who's going to outline where PRISYM ID fits in and to provide some further information on some specific products that have been customised for the printing of labels for global clinical trials. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Vince. Very interesting. So what I'm going to cover today is a little bit of background information on PRISYM and where we fit, as Vince said, but also an overview of PRISYM ClinTrial and also PRISYM Vision, and how you can use those to minimize risk and improve quality. So PRISYM ID have been in the auto ID industry for over 30 years, supplying lifecycle management printing solutions into general industry, and since 2000 into the life sciences market. And since then we've basically become market leaders within this area. We have offices within the US and also Europe, and with over 50 life sciences customers across the globe, going from Australia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe and North America, with over 4,000 users using our system at any time. We do actually pride ourselves with our forward approach, working very closely with our customers, seeing what our customers' future needs are, working with our customers for what they are looking to achieve and to get market presence, etc., And because of that forward thinking and I know one of the gentlemen is on the call today, with that forward thinking, PRISYM ID this year won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and a number of other awards. So thank you very much to our customers. We're also GS1 and 9001 credited, but in reality, what you guys are really interested in is our experience, and in essence, we basically eat, drink, and breathe validated labeling solutions or printing solutions within the life sciences market. Predominantly clinical trials, medical device, pharmaceutical, and with our back team of developers and PMs working with our customers, our product continues to strive, as I just mentioned. With our authors and our documentation team being able to work with our customers to implement validation, documentation, OQs and PQs, but also process OQs and PQs as well. And then our validation and implementation team working with our customers to, in essence, deliver a full end-to-end solution and turnkey solution if they were ever inspected to wave the flag. Our system itself is fully electronic, no paperwork, so we comply to 810, 820, work to the regulations of 810, 820, and also 21 CFR Part 11. Working fully within the GAMV model, and I presume everybody knows, but I will go through it anyway. We start off with the customer's URS, so user requirements, which is the most important document that we'll ever come across. We then sit down with the customer and write a full functional spec, an FS, which allows us to tell the customer how we are going to achieve their requirements and their specific challenges. And then we go to build and then follow the process back up the other side of the V for IQs, OQs, and PQs. Our documentation is, according to our customers and according to us, is second to none. Our product is designed from the ground up. To give you an idea of the sort of what we do with our customers, it was actually originally designed with a company in 1999, PRISYM Medica, with a company called GSK, which some of us will probably remember, or know. And in essence, that product then was fully documented as it was being built and fully documented as it's gone through its iterations. And our customer base, as I stated before, our customer base is global, from Australia all the way across to the US, dealing with many global projects and also single site projects where we basically will install, and some of these companies are the likes of Allergan, Brecon, J&J, the likes of single site applications, the Brecons, the Specials, the outsourced companies, etc. And the sort of product that they will be using, some of them will be using a global application, some of them will be using single user, single site, and other companies will be using components of this to fit into an overall solution. And that component is PRISYM ClinTrial. PRISYM ClinTrial is basically a management solution for, doesn't matter the actual end, either a label, an IFU, a booklet, but ultimately it's a solution for kit and pack label identification. There are three main components before you get to the auditing of the system. One is the design, and Vince took you through the approval process and version control. But ultimately you would design a format regardless of the end component, and that format will be containing variable data and data relative to local language, trial, etc., etc. When that product is designed, or when that format is designed, you will then go into an approval process, and at this stage you have the ability to either approve, brute force it through and approve into production, or you can involve others, either in turn that may have an interest in the end product. The second component is the trial design itself. Now you can do a number of things here: open, blind, randomized, scrambled trials, or you could just import trials itself. The principle is exactly the same. you design the trial, whether you put your patients in, you put your centers in, you put your stratifications in, whatever it may be, you build your trial up, and then you will send that through and version control and through the approval process. Exactly the same as your design process itself. And when both of those two components are approved and locked down, they are then ready for production. And as Vince very eloquently put earlier, you can go for just-in-time, you can go for batch, and you're able to control that printing process. And that's one of the things that ClinTrial brings to the table. The ability to take a trial and print components of that, to print on demand or to print every single part of the actual, they are then pushed through, or when sending the print command to the printer, that is then sent through to the audit trail itself, so the audit log. And the audit log keeps a carbon copy of every transaction that ever happens in the system, right from who designed the label, who designed the template, who designed the trial, who approved the trial, who changed the trial, who then done the print, and which part of the components did I actually print to the actual printer itself. And that's where you have a full life cycle management of cradle to death of the actual unit itself or the components, and the ability to prove, because at the end of the day, what you actually send to the printer itself. Now, depending on risk assessment, you will make a decision. Either you are happy with what you've actually sent to the printer, and as a company, my risk assessment says that I understand that the labels I sent have printed, and I can prove it this way. Or you can go, as many of our customers are going, is the ability to inspect the label. So when designing the format itself, PRISYM ID just released PRISYM Vision, which is a unique, only component on the market that does this, have the ability to audit not only what it was you sent to the printer, but actually what you actually checked. So if you get a ribbon crease, you will know about it. If you get a conflict with the printer, you will know about it. But also your audit log will know about it as well, and will keep a component, an inspection mask of any fails and passes. So if you're ever audited by your customers, your internal customers, or the FDA or other regulation, you have the ability to prove exactly what was printed. And in that way, you truly do have an end-to-end solution. So that's, as I said, a very brief overview. I would be happy to take this as an individual and show the components in considerably more detail at a later date, and please let Holly know. Thank you all very much for your time, and I will hand you back over to Holly.
Okay, thank you Warren, and thank you Vince. Please bear with us while we just collate some of the questions that have come in during the presentation. If you have any additional questions that you would like to submit, please do so now using the question tool on screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible, but we'll be providing written responses to all the questions asked during the webinar afterwards too. Thank you. Okay, let's look at the first question. First one that's come in is how thick a booklet can be overprinted.
Right, well, in terms of that, I mean, the two technologies I mentioned, one was the thermal transfer. Thermal transfer printers, I've sort of come across 30 pages, but I believe now that they're going up to around about 40. I think managed to get some of the paper a bit thinner. So I sort of come across printing, using overprinting booklets, using a thermal transfer printer up to about 40 pages. But after that, when they get bigger, then it's an inkjet technology you tend to use for overprinting, so there's no real restriction at that point. But if you want to use thermal transfer, which are great printers, then up to about 40 pages, I'd say.
Predominantly, the printer you would probably use within the overprinting would be a Sato because of its variable head.
Right. Where are 2D barcodes being used at present?
Right, but in terms of clinical trials, I've not seen 2D barcodes being used at all, very much at all. But in terms of 2D barcodes used in commercial print, clearly there's the serialization that's going ahead with sort of commercial pharmaceutical products, so being used in that area there. Also, in terms of a lot of work we do is in the medical device sector as well. So although a lot of our products are for clinical trials applications, equally we do a lot with medical device companies who are using 2D barcodes a lot. And with the 2D barcode, just to give a bit of information there, they store a lot more information clearly than a linear barcode, which is sort of tends to be just a pointer to the database. But a sort of a 2D code can hold an awful lot of information, useful information. And also with e-labeling as well, getting back to sort of websites, scanning the barcode, then the 2D labels, sort of 2D barcodes fit very nicely there.
Thank you. Next question is, will print inspector identify errors in a specific field on a label, such as a patient ID?
Yes. Basically, when you design a label, the label is actually, or a template, it's probably the best way to look at it. You have a number of fields on that template, and Print Inspector will actually inspect the individual fields rather than the overall label. If you wanted to inspect every field on the label, by all means, but if you wanted to make sure that there was critical information that needed to be checked in a particular field, you can inspect just that one field.
Do you work with a specific translation company at all?
We can work with any translation company. Our bread and butter business is very much sort of connectivity to all sorts of systems and picking up data and controlling that data. So we can work with any company. But yes, we do work with a couple of companies. One that's involved in the medical device sector, where there's some sort of specialisation there. Certain sort of standards and terms and phrases, etc. Med device, they tend to concentrate in that area, and another company that's involved in the sort of pharmaceutical space. So yes, we can work with many, but we do have a couple of companies we work with.
Okay. Is there a set of standard phrases used across all clinical trials companies?
No, I believe not at the moment, and but there are certainly moves afoot to actually get some sort of standard phrases, and it'd be very nice if we can get some standard phrases that could then be used across the board. And clearly these will change, and you know, the processes I mentioned we have in place would actually allow you to change those phrases for your own need, because you know, although they would be standard to start with, as time goes on, companies do change. I think I mentioned in the presentation where it's sort of quite common, and that's with the global harmonisation. So within the sort of transportation of hazardous chemicals across Europe, that they have managed to put a whole set of phrases together, pictograms, and bundle that all up. That's an area we've been involved with as a company to actually sort of provide those phrases. So we have got experience in that area, but as yet, no, I don't believe there is a sort of standard set.
Okay, just because of time, we're only going to answer one more question, and that is, who are the biggest users of clinical trials label management tools?
Good question. Well, we probably have, there's two ends for us on the clinical trials side. One is the smaller outsource house, where they will be looking to use our system for overprinting of trials and distribution of trials relative to their customers. And then we have the global projects where we are involved in multi-site control of trials and overprinting of trials, such as the Halicans and the Brackens, etc.
Okay, thank you everyone. Okay, so we're going to wrap up there, but as mentioned earlier, we will be providing a written response to delegates of all the questions that we've received. We hope you've enjoyed today's presentation and found it informative. For further inquiries, please visit the website, which is www.prisymid.com, or email us using the address on screen. We also have a Twitter account if you'd like to follow us on a more regular basis, and also LinkedIn. Well, thanks again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day.